Please join Joni and me and welcome to celebration today, John Ramsey. John, God bless you.
Thank you, sir.
You know, let's start off by saying this. Almost the whole world knows about the tragic loss of Jean Benet, but a lot of people don't also realize that you actually lost 3 very important females to death.
Yes.
3, not just one.
Yes.
One is terrible enough, but 3, that is just beyond my comprehension.
Well, it's been a rough road, but God has gotten me through it, and I see that very clearly. That's how I got through it.
Okay, and so tell us about Miss Elizabeth first.
Well, Elizabeth was my oldest daughter, and had just graduated from Miami of Ohio University and started work as a Delta flight attendant, and was in Chicago to visit her special boyfriend's parents for the first time. And they were on their way to a museum in the middle of the day, and both were killed in a car accident.
Oh my.
And just rocked my world to its foundations, and rocked my faith to its foundations as well.
This was 1992.
It was 92,
and you didn't have the relationship with the Lord at that time.
No,
that you have today.
I called myself a cultural Christian. I was a Christian because I was born into a Christian home and went to church because that was the right thing to do. Didn't really go much deeper than that, quite honestly. And so when that happened, you think, wait, that's not supposed to happen. That's not the deal. You know, I'm supposed to be protected, and I didn't really understand what God promised and didn't promise us. And
you even got angry at God.
Oh,
for
I
a little
did.
bit,
I mean, as I received that phone call that morning from my brother to tell me that Beth had been killed, I just jumped up and just threw the phone down and just screamed, "There is no God! There is no God!" Because I thought, how could a loving God let this happen to this beautiful child who had so much to give to the world? And it really, fortunately, there was a bedrock of faith that my mother had instilled in me by dragging me to the Episcopal church we went to in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so I really began to question and try to understand what God's promises were and what Christianity was and what the message was. What really could I take to the bank, so to speak, and what and most importantly, was this great Christian promise of everlasting life really true? Would I ever see Beth again? I wasn't willing just to accept that. I'm an engineer by education, so I've got to analyze things and think through them. And I spent a lot of time reading and studying and questioning, asking questions. Some friends came alongside me and helped me. A good friend of mine who I had been a business partner with for several years, our business relationship, called and said, "John, I want to spend some time with you." And so I said, "That'd be wonderful." He said, "I've been praying for you for 10 years.
Wow.
And I think it's time that we really spend some time together. I'm going to teach you how to study the Bible." And we met once a week and had Bible study one-on-one.
And you were open at this point.
Oh, I was totally open. I was trying to understand what this was all about, because I hadn't really, was never forced to ask that question. And
I think a lot of people didn't. I know I didn't really realize that you had lost Beth, your daughter, actually years before you would
4 years before
before you would lose Jean Benet.
Yes.
And so that loss, I mean, was already something you dealt with, but so you began to study the Bible once a week. And how did that change your life, John?
Well, it really, I began to understand the Bible. My friend said, I forget which book we started. It was Philippians or Romans. He said, "We're going to spend 6 months on Romans." I'm thinking, well, I can read it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
How could we spend 6 months? But he really taught me how to study the Bible and to dig into it and understand what it was really saying, and we talk about it. And it was just all of a sudden, it was making sense to me. I told him, I said, when I first started to read the Bible as a cultural Christian, it seemed like I was reading it backwards. It didn't make any sense. And he said, well, that's a gift of the Holy Spirit that you now understand it. And I really began to dig in, and I asked those hard questions that I think a new believer or potential believer asks. What about the resurrection? Is that, how can I accept that and not just take it at face value? And my faith kind of transitioned from this intellectual study and challenging, and I read a lot of books where the author had done the same thing, to accepting it, and then it went kind of from my head to my heart, and that really was the transition I went through.
You know,
but it took several years.
Yeah, it's an ongoing, it's an ever-growing process. We should continue our study of the Word, our prayers, our daily fellowship with God. You know, Joni and I we both read the book, and then we realized something that made it even more special to us. That JonBenet, this beautiful little blonde, was born in 1990. And our beautiful little blonde, Miss Rachel Michelle, was also born in 1990, and we still have her. And when she came home last night from college, from spring break, the first thing I did is just hug her and tell her I love her.
Yeah.
And I thought about you, John, that at least right now you're not able to do that, but you're going to.
I know.
You're going to get to one day, and so I'm so grateful, honey, that we haven't been through something as tragic as this.
One of the things that fascinated me so much with the story was because we have a daughter exactly the same age with blonde hair and blue eyes. In fact, I think we got maybe a picture of Rachel we can show.
Gosh.
There's Rachel. She's just turned 22, and she's a senior, you know, in college. And so it really caught my attention, the story, because I had a daughter exactly the same age. And so let's move forward a little bit into...
Well, let's show a little bit. We've got some video of JonBenet. Let's see her. She was just the prettiest little girl ever. So full of life, so charming, such personality. She was always laughing and smiling. And, I mean, she was just very, very special. John, how does that make you feel seeing her like that?
Oh, it brings smiles to me. You know, a minister in Atlanta told me, he said, John, the memories that bring pain today will bring smiles tomorrow.
Wow.
And I found that to be very true.
So
it was hard to believe it back then, though, wasn't it, when he first told you?
Yeah, very hard to believe that.
So how hard is it to look at that, or is there like a joy that you have now that you can watch it?
It's a joy. She was a beautiful child on the inside, and a spark plug in our family, and you know, even though we suffered intense pain, it was wonderful to have her for those 6 years, and a blessing.
1996 December was like a roller coaster ride for John Ramsey and his family, because in December his company hit the $1 billion sales mark. But then the tragedy struck, because on December the 26th is when you found JonBenet, and right there in your own house. I mean, I can't, you know, that had to be one of the most shocking things that anybody could ever experience. I mean, your little girl dead, but right there in your own house.
Yeah. Yeah, your house is your refuge, and at that instant it wasn't anymore. We never went back in that house again after that morning.
Wow.
I couldn't do it. And you know, when I found her, it was both a relief and a horror. I mean, I was just relieved to find my baby, but realized pretty quickly that she was not alive.
You know, one thing I've told Joni many times over the years, that to be falsely accused would have to be one of the most terrible things that anybody could ever go through. I guess the only thing would be worse is if you were falsely accused and then incarcerated on top of that.
Yeah, and that's happened, of course.
So you and Patsy and your son Burke, at one time or the other, each of you were under the suspicion of the murder of your precious little girl. How did you cope with that? How did that make you feel? What kind of thoughts went through your head going through that?
It was, I guess, a progression in that when we were first told that we would be investigated, we were shocked. You know, how could you possibly think that? But we said, okay, we accept that, anticipating that that would be a short process and then the investigation would move on. And we kept thinking, well, they're going to eventually realize that, you know, we were a loving family and there was no history of any problems and all the factual things that they should be looking at, and then move on. Well, they just never did. You know, they made their decision that day, and
why, have you ever figured out why they wanted to accuse you and Patsy of this, and they never would look at anything else?
Well,